I'm alone, I'm a broken home. I gave you all the bricks that I own and know. I'm letting go, I'm breaking these walls down, breaking these walls down. If you want adventure, then fly to home. But if you wanna travel, then go alone. Yeah, what's the point in us if I never know? Yeah, if you're gonna leave, I'ma let you go. I'm tired of the pain. Go away. I'm tired of yesterday. Harder, harder. I fell where my demons dwell. My own little nightmare, I call it hell. Oh well, it's time to get back up, climbing and climbing. I'm done with this ride, is what I tell myself, so I could feel something else. Yeah, I guess I had my bad days, but it doesn't mean I lost my style. Darling, where were you when my heart was on the ground? I thought time would prove that you would stick around. I guess time stood still, a king without his crown. Now I'm breaking, you're faking, girl. You never made a sound. Oh, wait, I'm tired of the pain. Go away. I'm tired of yesterday. Harder, harder.
Hello everybody, welcome and thank you for being here. My name is Jorge and I am the director of the Science of Connector. And in this talk I would like to talk a little bit about what is it that we do and how we apply AI to what I think is a rather curious and unexpected use case. So let's get to it. When we started the company, we actually wanted to do something significant, something that had a little bit of impact in the world. And already back then we identified that there is a gap within the farming industry in how they implement technology in general. So we thought, okay, why don't we try to actually make an AI that can help us to farm and that can empower farmers of all sizes to try to be a little bit more efficient and to make the change to sustainable farming. And really try to make our farming more efficient is not something that's debatable, because as we know, by the year 2050 there will be more than 9 billion people on this planet. So that means that we will need to produce up to more than 60% more food that we produce right now, and that will be without increasing the amount of water or land that we use for it. So the industry we decided to focus on first is the dairy industry, so dairy cows, and our first product is IDA. And you can think of IDA as kind of an assistant for a dairy farmer. So the idea is that it will help you to identify the issues that you have in your farm, and is going to try to come up with solutions for what to do about them. And I think the difference that we have with respect of other products is that maybe in other products they try to show you a lot of graphs or like a lot of metrics in really big spreadsheets, and we kind of try to go away from there. So we try to provide what we call the insight. So basically it has to be very clear what is it that's going on, not necessarily showing a lot of data, but it also has to be very clear what is it that the farmer has to do to solve the situation. And actually within this concept of the insights, we can have incorporated a feedback loop where actually the farmer can go, for instance, into the app, and when he sees one of these insights he can actually say whether or not he thought that feedback was correct. And actually this is a feedback that we get, that we make labels with, and these are the labels that we actually use to train many of the models that we have. So where do you start when you want to do something like this? So let's say that you know that the subject of your study is going to be a cow, so maybe it makes sense to try to say something about their behavior. So things that the cow do are, for instance, walking, eating, ruminating, standing down, laying down. So these are the kind of behaviors that you could expect. Okay, so how do we measure that? And the first challenge that we saw back when we started the company was that there's not really a public dataset available for this kind of stuff. Which partly makes sense because we were actually the first company that tried to apply machine learning to dairy cows. But it's actually the case that it was like that because there is no suitable hardware that you can actually use to come up with this dataset. So just to give you guys an example, the kind of sensors that you had available back then, they were pedometers, so it's a very simple machine that goes around the leg of the cow, and it will have like a metal ball that every time that the cow makes a step, it will make kind of a click. So for every step of the cow, you will get a signal with one click. And that's how you can measure how much the cow walks. But that's basically the only thing that you can measure with these things. So in that regard, it's not very useful. And the sensor that we have developed ourselves goes around the neck and is actually using an accelerometer to detect changes in movement. So this is actually the same sensor that you have in your phone, for instance. And there were all the challenges, like, for example, where do you even borrow a cow? So back in the days when we didn't know the answer to this question, what we had to do was even use our office dog at the time to kind of do tests with him. So what about the implementation? I think here is kind of clear that you have to go for the deep learning approach, simply because you could try to come up with rules to kind of interpret of these different movements and patterns of movements, but I think at some point it will very soon become very complicated. And also in this case, we have convolutional neural networks, which is really the perfect tool for this task. And there's also good reasons to choose CNNs over recursive networks when you go to a very low-end device, or a device that doesn't consume a lot of power. And what we started with initially was by running our models in a base station. And basically this base station is kind of a computer that sits on the farm that is responsible for collecting all of the information from all the different sensors that are running. Then it runs the model, and then it outputs the predictions to the internet and there to the cloud. And we started doing this, but then if you run this model on the sensor, then basically you can reduce the bandwidth that you use for the sensor, because then it only has to send the output, not the input. And you can use this new bandwidth that you have to actually support more cows within the same space. And we've managed to do it in such a way that the models that we train, in this case we use TensorFlow for that, we can actually run them in these devices that are really low end, and so much so that they don't even have an OS. They have to run on a really small amount of RAM. But then I think the really cool thing is that at least we managed to make the battery of these sensors to last for more than 3 years. Which I think is quite an achievement also because, and to be honest, the farmers are not really going to buy a product that they have to change really much more often than that. And the reason is that even if you are very good at changing these sensors, it will still take you at the very least a few minutes per cow to change only one. So if the moment that you have any farm that has already a normal size, this will easily go into the days of work, so that's not something that many people can afford to do. So once we have this model running, and actually let's look at what is it that it produces so that we can get an idea of how this is actually used in practice. And the picture that I'm showing here now is actually, I think it is 3 days in the life of a healthy cow actually. So the horizontal axis shows time, it goes from left to right. And the vertical one is also time, but in this time in percentage, so it should be interpreted as what amount of time the cow is doing a particular behavior. And these behaviors are divided in, let's say, in 2 bands. So the one on the top has to do with behaviors that have to do something with the head. So for instance, in green you have eating, in orange you have rumination. So rumination is basically taking the stuff that you have in the stomach to chew on it a bit more and then putting it back into another stomach. And the last behavior that we have here is actually idle, so doing nothing, that's on gray. And on the lower part we have behaviors that have to do with the body of the cow, so we have laying down, which is on green, we have standing up, which is on blue, and we have walking, which is in purple. So this is actually a very good example because it shows that there is kind of a daily pattern in this life. So what you would see is actually a few meals which are in green in the top part of the graph, and these meals are usually always at the same time during the day, simply because that's the point at the time during the day where the farmer actually pushes the feed to the fences, and then that is followed by a few cycles of rumination. So the cow first eats and then it ruminates on that, and actually this rumination is usually happening when the cow is laying down, which means that the cow is actually quite comfortable. And this is another example. So this one is also a healthy cow, but this one is showing signs of estrus. And with estrus here, what we mean is the most fertile moment during the ovulation cycle of the cow. And this cycle is around 21 days long. And the idea is that you would inseminate the cow at this peak moment, and usually the window that you have for doing this is very short. But then again, if you don't get your cow pregnant, then that will happen is that you will have to wait another 21 days before you have another chance. And in the long run, these are 21 days that you will lose of milk production. So it does have a very big economical impact. And how this manifests itself in the cow is actually by making her a little bit more active and more nervous. So that's why on this graph you actually see an increase on walking times, for instance. And actually one of the machine learning models that we have within our product, it is actually detecting these kind of outliers. And already here from this image you can see that the usual trade-off that we have in machine learning between precision and recall in this case is also a bit incomplete, because we also have to take care of timeliness because it's a time-bounded problem. So for instance, if I was to give a model with this input data, we can see that the outlier is very clear, it's very beautiful in the center of the screen. So in theory you could detect it very well, but if you look at the x-axis you will be detecting it at least 1 day or even a bit more than 1 day late, and at that point it will basically be useless to take any action on it because it will already be too late. So there is a very tricky balance between precision, recall and timeliness that you have to take care of when building a model like this. This is another example, in this case a sick cow, and here you can see very clearly how this cow seem to be ruminating more or less okay. So that would be the orange part of the graph until more or less the middle of the graph, and then it suddenly stopped ruminating for some reason. And you can still see that she seems to be eating now and then, but she's not really able to ruminate on that feed that she's ingesting. So usually when you see a rumination drop like this, that's a very big indication of something going really wrong with the cow. And what we're seeing here really is just one type of outlier, which could very well be something like a digestive issue. But depending on the kind of disease, you will get different kinds of outliers. So for example, some of them will be very short. For example, if we are talking about a fever, some diseases are very long, like lameness, and some others are even seasonal. So while it's not really a disease, but something like heat stress, it is definitely a health issue, and that happens when the cows are very warm. So they don't feel comfortable and they actually produce less milk than usual. So how will we go about training a model to detect health diseases, for instance? So here again, I think it makes sense to go for an architecture that's either an LSTM or a CNN, simply because of the time nature of the problem. And there's also some trade-offs between these two architectures. So for example, the LSTM, we see that in practice it works a little bit better. But then the good thing about the convolutional neural network is that usually the implementations that you have are faster. So what I prefer to do is to start while I'm experimenting with the CNN, and then once I have a pipeline that I can more or less trust, then I can go into the LSTM, which are a little bit slower. And something that's also interesting about the dataset that we have is that it is extremely unbalanced. So most of the cows are healthy all the time, of course, but even within the sick category there's many different diseases and they don't all happen with the same frequency. So something very easy that you can do for that is to use something called a local loss, and this loss, what it does is it actually gives more weight to the labels that happen within the less likely classes, so that your training can be a little bit more balanced. And another question is actually how long your input should be. So should I look at 6 days, 6 hours, 12 hours, what is it that I should do? and ideally you would like to use, of course, the biggest window that you can have, because that could aid in detecting some diseases that actually happen very slowly over time. But at the same time, every time that you do this, you make the problem more complicated, which means that it will also be slower to train, you will need a bigger model, and you will also need more labels to compensate for the fact that you're going to be using a bigger model. And another characteristic of the dataset that we have is that it can have gaps, which is not something that happens in every domain. And in here, what it makes sense to do is, if you only have a single model, then maybe you can alter your training to make it a little bit more robust against this kind of noise. But in the end of the day, if you're going to have, let's say, 6-7 different models that are going to have to do the same thing, it actually makes sense to have a model on its own that's basically a denoising autoencoder from which you can derive features that then the rest of the models can use, and then they don't have to take care about the fact that there can be gaps in your data. So now the question is, does this model actually work? And the good thing is that it does, and as a matter of fact, there are many issues that we can detect even days before the farmer can visually see something. And I think this is very important, because the sooner you detect a disease, it means that the cow is going to be healthier for more time. So that also means that she's going to produce more milk, so that has a very positive economic impact for a farmer. And also, besides this, we actually did a test in the Wageningen University, which are very well known for doing this kind of research on agriculture. And what we tried to do was to compare actually two sets of cows. So one of them was not wearing any sensor, and one of them was wearing either sensor. So there was two different groups, and they were compared in terms of how they scored health-wise. And actually what we saw was that there was a reduction in 50% of the amount of antibiotics that the cows with IDA showed, which I think is actually really great, because especially in these days where antibiotic resistance is a serious concern. So unfortunately, this is all that we have time for. I thank you everybody for listening, and I hope you found it interesting.
I'm alone, I'm a broken home. I gave you all the bricks that I own and know. I'm letting go, I'm breaking these walls down, breaking these walls down. If you want adventure, then fly to home. But if you wanna travel, then go alone. Yeah, what's the point in us if I never know? Yeah, if you're gonna leave, I'ma let you go. I'm tired of the pain. Go away. I'm tired of dancing. I fell where my demons dwell. My own little nightmare, I call it hell. Oh well, it's time to get back up. Climbing and climbing, I'm done with this ride, is what I tell myself, so I could feel something else. Yeah, I guess I had my bad days, but it doesn't mean I lost myself. Darling, where were you when my heart was on the ground? I thought time would prove that you would stick around. I guess time stood still, a king without his crown. Now I'm breaking and you're faking, girl. You never made a sound. Oh, away.
Hi, I'm Kadian, and today I'll be talking to you about promoting health sustainability in smart homes. By taking a global perspective, we see that population aging is an unprecedented challenge. It's estimated that by 2050, 37% of Europe's population will be over 60 years old. By extension, population aging is projected to affect public spending on health and social care. I have a friend that I would like you to meet. Here is Alice. She's a 70-year-old widow who lives in Amsterdam. She conducts her activities of daily living with ease. She does her laundry, she cooks, she cleans, and she occasionally meddles with gardening. However, as Alice ages, her health needs could become a bit more complicated, and it's highly likely that she will develop one or more chronic diseases. We have a dilemma. Alice wants to stay at home and age in place. So how can we support Alice to stay healthy and age with dignity and respect at home? Health sustainability offers this possibility. But what exactly is sustainability? In broad terms, it can be described as the capacity of a system to endure and maintain itself over time. There are three pillars to sustainability. These include the social, environmental, and economic pillars. And in the middle, we see sustainable healthcare systems. These systems promise to deliver high-quality care, improve public health, and most importantly, they do not deplete natural resources. In order to deliver sustainable healthcare systems, we need to first understand the current challenges of healthcare. Now, if I ask you what's on your mind, it's highly possible that COVID-19 could pop up. And from this pandemic, we can see that healthcare systems are currently designed for acute care and not chronic care. And also from the pandemic, we can see that there are fewer healthcare specialists available. Observations over time suggest that there are increased greenhouse emissions from hospital care. We also see that there is a reduction in consultation time. Many people have poor health and food literacy, and there is an increased pressure on formal and informal care services. There's something that I would like to draw your attention to. Health-related outcomes such as obesity, depression, and injury can be linked to the way we live, how we spend our time at home. As such, well-designed living spaces can help healthcare providers to provide better care. So how do we innovate healthcare? Smart homes offer a myriad of possibilities. These include, but are not limited to, activity monitoring, fall detection, social connectedness, and self-management. And taking the designerly perspective, the design goal here is to create more sustainable smart homes by taking a holistic approach to support healthy and active aging in place. But how are we going to take this holistic approach? My suggestion is to adopt a multi-stakeholder approach and leverage state-of-the-art technologies such as the Internet of Things, robotics, sensing, artificial intelligence, machine learning, ambient technologies, and take a patient-centered approach. I will repeat, it's imperative that you take a patient-centered approach in order to achieve health sustainability. In my research practice, I have deployed a myriad of participatory design techniques. And from experience, what I've garnered is that creative patient-centered methodologies are most effective. And in this presentation, I will discuss two of these methodologies. They include the co-constructing stories and the co-creation process. Now, with the co-constructing stories, it has two phases. We have the sensitization phase and the elaboration phase. In the sensitization phase, what we do is that we help the participant to recollect and remember their past experiences. In the elaboration phase, what we do is we expose them and help them to envision future scenarios. For example, you're going to try and help these participants to envision future scenarios with sustainable healthcare systems. And the co-constructing stories, they offer a number of benefits. These include the researcher or the designer develops a holistic understanding of the user and their context. You also help the participant to envision future scenarios. It reduces the cognitive burden, which is normally associated with traditional interviewing methods or traditional ethnographic methods. It's very interactive and engaging. And what I really like about it is that as a researcher, you get to elicit real life experiences of your participants. It's not without limitations, and some of these include the time-consuming nature of the process, and a pilot is definitely needed. Here is an example that we have deployed with obese participants in our food sampler project. Now, considering the co-creation process, it's really a process where the user plays a central role in the process. The user really becomes the key ethnographer. It's very collaborative in nature and it offers a myriad of advantages. Again, I will repeat, the user is the key designer. It's very efficient. And as a researcher or designer, you get to uncover the true needs of your participants. It's very interactive and engaging. And finally, it unleashes the creative juices of your participants. It's not without limitations, like the co-constructing stories method. Here, it requires a lot of planning, and from experience, I will tell you, make sure you plan and structure your co-design or co-creation session before you execute. Also, it's important that you train your group facilitators. That's very important to the process. And another disadvantage that I have experienced is that you have to as I mentioned, you would need to train your facilitators, and the facilitators has to be really, really strong to manage the group dynamics. And here's an example we have deployed in the food sampler project at TU Delft. We designed our own toolkit. We had a number of activities for our participants to help them to design and envision products that they can use to better self-manage their obesity condition. Now, the next topic that I will talk about is the social hue. It's a viable product for smart homes, and it's very dear to me because it's the outcome of my PhD process. And what exactly is the social hue? First of all, it's a bidirectional human activity-based system for improving social connectedness between the elderly and their caregivers. What we did is that we used smartphone sensors to detect human activities, and we rendered this information using ambient displays. Initially, we used curve stitching patterns to render this information, and later we exploited the Philips Hue and LED lights through a LED cane and wallet to provide this information to the elderly and their caregivers. The features of the social hue. It provides real-time activity monitoring. It exploits low cost mobile phone sensor, so that's a plus for sustainability. And again, it enhances context awareness and provides bidirectional social connectedness. It's portable, which is another plus for sustainability. From what you can see, look at the LED cane. It's portable. The LED wallet is portable, and it's accurate. We achieved an accuracy of 99.7% using the SVM H&M activity recognition algorithm, and it's very reliable and scalable. It also reduces the burden on caregivers. So I'm very excited about it. It's viable for smart homes, it's scalable, and it offers a myriad of possibilities. Now, from my own experience with the social hue, and also from the food sampler project, I have garnered a number of design qualities and functions that can be employed to designing usable products for health sustainability in smart homes. I'll go through the list. First, the designer needs to take a holistic and patient-centered approach, which I mentioned before in previous slides. The products needs to be creative, interactive, and engaging. So to make a product engaging, you need to add motivational elements, invite them to use your device. You can employ gamification, etc. The product needs to be scalable, affordable. It should be real-time, time and energy efficient, interoperable, accurate, resilient, portable, and finally easy to use and effortless. When we think about the functions of designing usable products, what these products should do is they should build a low carbon economy. They should support remote monitoring and telecare. In the case of the social hue, it supports remote monitoring. It's scalable to support telecare in the future. It should facilitate emergency detection. Again, the social hue is scalable to support that in the future. It should be geared towards disease prevention by promoting physical activity, etc. It should enhance health and food literacy. We're trying to develop systems like that in the current food sampler project at TU Delft. It should encourage self-management. Initiatives to do that are also being employed at TU Delft. And it should respect the privacy and dignity rights of the elderly. Also, what you want to do is to stimulate or promote social interaction. We see that happening with the social hue. The results show that persons who interacted with the system really felt connected with their counterparts. And overall, your system should improve the quality of life and psychological well-being of the elderly. In my concluding remarks, I'd like to say this. Redesigning healthcare systems to promote health sustainability is not a trivial task. It requires a multi-stakeholder approach that I mentioned earlier in the presentation for the collaboration of policymakers, housing agencies, health professionals, social services, citizens, academics, designers, and engineers to reshape healthcare systems towards more sustainability. So, in order to make this happen, to help Alice, to help people like Alice and ourselves, let's work together to achieve this outcome. Do it for Alice, and most importantly, do it for you. Thank you for your attention.
I'm alone, I'm a broken home. I gave you all the bricks that I own and know. I'm letting go, I'm breaking these walls down, breaking these walls down. If you want adventure, then fly to home. But if you wanna travel, then go alone. Yeah, what's the point in us if I never know? Yeah, if you're gonna leave, I'ma let you go. I'm tired of the pain. Go away. I'm tired of yesterday. I fell where my demons dwell. My own little nightmare, I call it hell. Oh well, it's time to get back up. Climbing and climbing, I'm done with this ride, is what I tell myself, so I could feel something else. Yeah, I guess I had my bad days, but it doesn't mean I lost my style. Darling, where were you when my heart was on the ground? I thought time would prove that you would stick around. I guess time stood still, a king without his crown. Now I'm breaking and you're faking, girl. You never made a sound.
Good afternoon, public. Welcome to my speech. Your association asked me to tell something about agriculture and food and the challenges they face and how AI could contribute to our domain. So here I am. We have great challenges to face. And how do we innovate us out of this? Because it will not be easy in next decades. My name is Erik Pekkeriet. I work at Wageningen University at Research. I'm the program manager on agri-food robotics, which means that I'm responsible for the whole portfolio of robotic projects throughout of the university. We have an agile team where all the researchers on robotics are gathered. We have 40 people now at research. Then there is the university with the professors. So together we have now, well, let's say 60 to 70 people working on robotics. So what do we do? Our expertises are based in vision, 2D, 3D, motion pictures, spectral image analysis, so outside the human eye, from X-ray up to terahertz and all kind of images you would like to visualize, but this comes also a lot with domain knowledge. What do you see in a spectral band in the infrared area, for example? We measure internal content, sugars, proteins, these kind of things, but also in leaves, in products. Then we have the learning, artificial intelligence, and we have also an expertise in robotic systems, integration tasks, simulation environments, building end effectors, integrate the whole thing up to the farm success. That's basically what we do. We serve specific proposition towards our markets. One of them is breeding of animals, breeding of plants, and structuring the phenotype, so giving features of movements, of growth of plants, diseases, these kind of things. Then we have our second proposition, circular agri-food systems, which comes with the precision agriculture and horticulture, the drones, the sensing machines, but also to apply pesticide, fertilizer, water, air movement, energy, climate control. That's all related to circular agri-food production systems to make them as efficient and resilient as possible. Third proposition is hands-free. robotize all human labor out. Then objective product and process quality. It's the post-harvest part. When the product is harvested, it needs to be processed, packed, handled, logistics, and we have to follow the whole chain. In every step, we would like to secure the best product in that domain. So that's what we do in that proposition. And last thing, to make an idea until a success fully implemented, it's also about ethics, uptake, and also serving the whole ecosystem, all stakeholders around it. So that's what we also do. So that's what we do at Wageningen. That's how we have organized this. And yeah, because what we are facing is quite severe farmer conditions at the moment. You know that it's very difficult for farmers at the moment. They have a very demanding consumer who would like to have a very safe, ecological product. But for the farmer, the consumer wants circular resilience, personalized nutrition, first quality, energy efficient as possible, low energy input, as ecological as possible. But for the farmer, it means a lot more labor. It also comes with tracking and tracing a lot of new data. He's using this data also for his labor force. So he automated all the logistics already. So the labor force that's already still working there is doing very much repetitive, autonomous tasks in the primary process. Also the quality first, if you want to have long shelf life, you have the cold chain. So people are working in the cold chains, 10 degrees of Celsius, doing all kinds of work with meat to preserve the product as good as possible for you. But to work in these kind of conditions is quite severe. They don't see daylight, humid areas, a lot of cleaning, chemicals used. To reduce waste, increase shelf life, and do it safe without contamination of corona or what else. Last issue is the energy efficiency, especially in greenhouses. Greenhouses tend to get hotter and hotter, and we have a climate issue already. So in 10 years time, we see an increase of 5 degrees Celsius in a greenhouse, up to above 30 degrees, also more humid because we tend to close greenhouses as much as possible. Because at the moment we produce at 30 degrees in summertime and 80% humidity. So we see a lot of people working away, especially the younger people. I also come to my next slide. So especially most work is still done in the primary process. So many repetitive, also seasonal work, autonomous during all day, 24/7 almost, in high peaks. It's already from decades that we see the input of labor declining. So this is where we are now in Europe. So in Europe, we are less than 2% working in farming and producing food for the rest of Europe. And it's the same in other countries, other nations. We also see aging of the most of the labor force is coming from abroad, Poland, Bulgaria, Romania. We see also this population aging, so the people will tend to get older. Younger people have better jobs, can speak other languages, and move to the cities, especially in China. We see that very much. That also there is the rural environment aging, and the younger people are moving to cities, and the older people have to do all the work. So also China is very much looking into robotics and what they should do there. And we can see that already 2/3 of the Japanese farmer is 60 plus, and that's not a very sustainable way of food production. I know you would like to go to the ecological way, but I'm pretty sure you will not find the labor force to do this because it costs way more work, way more labor, and we really need to go to a more automated way, and robotics could be one of the solutions to that. I also wrote a nice article about it. If you want to know everything, please read this, Arbeid in de Toekomst. It's Dutch, but I was very much triggered by another issue, and that's treating people as robots. So really the people who are working in a primary process, these working conditions decline, and it's also much more difficult. It comes with high peak and it's seasonal. You can imagine that we are facing very big problems there. And it's more and more difficult to find this labor force to do this work. In the secondary process, so when it comes to handle data, logistics, sales, new products, it becomes much more interesting. Agriculture and food, if you do not have to touch every product by hand, it's fun because chains are shortening. The farmer is really making the deal with retail, and all chains in between are squeezed out because they are not making a product. They have limited added value, and if you want to have fast chains, it comes from labor to consumer, and there's a retail in between. But yeah, a lot of new tasks like packaging and these kind of services are coming to the farmer. So farming now these days is interesting and it's challenging and it's nice. And there's a lot of technology available. These are a few benefits. Read it carefully when you look to this email, because we have many opportunities, and then we can really produce in a different way. We already are on that train. So if you look to the IoT, that's already coming towards us. Before we had a product, the product became a little bit electronic, some steering and controlling. It became connected to the machines behind the tractor. There's a direct data connection between the tractor and machines behind. Also put into the farm management system so they can control their fleet. The machines are logged into the farm management system. On every square meter they can see and check what they do and how much they apply on the fertilizer, chemicals, these kind of things. And of course all these systems should also be brought to the outside world, connected to a lot of services. And yeah, this is our IoT domain, and also the IoT domain of the farmer more and more. And we already see farms like Lely is making, so they made already farms where only 4 days a week is a human active in that farm, and they can run 3 days without any labor involvement, do a fully automatic production of milk, the feeding, cleaning, also the mixing, controlling the cows, the milking. It's all done in an automated way, full robotized. I think dairy is one of the furthest in our domain. This is a location in greenhouses where already a lot of robots are implemented. Not the right above, but the other ones are already working in a commercial situation. And that works quite well, but they are not going into the greenhouse. So it's still at the beginning of the greenhouse or in the open field. So still some work needs to be done there. Same with autonomous driving. You see a lot of autonomy, but there's some regulation that it needs to be supervised yet. A few of them are already commercialized, but still a lot of work needs to be done, and especially these kind of vehicles left on the bottom, they are still in a research domain and not very much implemented. The ones that are implemented are the master-slave situations, and also these kind of lawnmowers where someone else is preparing the bunkers and the machine can run on itself. And it is supervised for an emergency stop. Also some actuation, weeding, broccoli harvesting, asparagus harvesting, and also digging weeds from out of the grasslands. Some in the research stage of this broccoli one, but it's because we work on this with a US investor, and it's not allowed to show the newest videos. And from the agricultural point of view, we are very much focusing on yield and quality measurements. And based on that, we can also determine stress. And we can also look at the photosynthesis. We do with other cameras to determine stresses in plants. And eventually, we would like to detect the diseases. Also for this, We make a lot of machines that can detect in greenhouses pests and diseases and growth, make a forecast on what could be harvested today, tomorrow, and 2 weeks up front, so that farmers already can start selling these kind of products. This is what we see if we are looking for diseases. We can, with our cameras, when just leaves look green, we can see how the photosynthesis responds on a specific disease or a stress or a chemical. And this is our sweet pepper robot. We started this with also a student from Nijmegen. He did a very good job. He did his PhD on the sweet pepper harvester. This was one of our early stage attempts. We did a lot of simulation work, come back to that later, spectral work, also SLAM, and also bringing the human in the loop. So a lot of AI was involved in the whole of the project. Bringing in the loop is also very important, but also do it very practical, do a pre-harvest with the robot, save 50% of the labor force and do the rest with human labor. And in the meantime, you can also send a scene to an operator at the beginning. He can control 20 robots and assist the robots when the robot is not confident enough to do a good harvest. And the human is already training the whole bunch of robots. And if the robots works at the same speed, you already need the same amount of workers. And in an average greenhouse, you have 40 harvesters doing exactly the same task. So 40 robots can have even 4 times as much time, because you have 168 hours a week. And these kind of approaches are very viable now to discuss with farmers. We also do some simulation, build some simulation environments. Yeah, we're very impressed by what animation industry is doing. We try also to make our own product and even make our randomizer so that we can grow our own crops and make greenhouses with these crops in an artificial way. And then we can also look from camera position and find the best position to start our cycle, and also to find as much as possible sweet peppers. But not only that, because we have drawn these kind of pictures, we have made the synthetic data for animation. We know exactly where the fruits, the stems, the leaves, the nerves, wires are, and based on this information we can also train real plants, the real environment. And that's what we did. So we made a randomizer. This is an artificial plant on the left side. On the right side there's a real plant, and we try to train them towards each other. So we did a few steps in between so that they look even more towards each other. And then we trained the synthetic data, so the artificial environment, to the real environment. And after a while, we could also find the sweet peppers in the real environment with these algorithms, just doing deep learning. And that is very powerful, without doing any other thing of image analysis. Just train the synthetic data to the real. Then it's also very easy to pick the fruits in a very fast way. And as you can see, we just use one camera and do the whole image recognition and find these five sweet peppers. And it's the same speed as a human is looking, I think. That's where we are now. And we also made robotics to the easiest component, because it's only the end effector which is doing the whole work. There is the camera, there is the illumination, there is the cutting device, and there's the grasp. And this is how we, and there's just a robotic arm. The robotic arm is standing on exactly the same spot as normally a human being would stand. And also the buffering is the same as we do with human beings. So also the cost of this robot is now already cheaper than a human being 1 year. And if the robot could last 5 years, you save a lot of money. Another project was TrimBot, also very interesting. We used a LiDAR scanner together with a 360 view, and also made a point cloud from out of the LiDAR scanner, put all the pictures on that point cloud and make a 3D full environment of a garden. To do automated cutting and pruning with this robot. This is an example what we do. We just move random through this kind of garden. Here you see the laser dots. We build the laser dots to a full picture. You will see it now. Yes, and then you have quite a detailed view already. And if you start pasting also the color images back, you have a full reconstruction of your garden, and you can do management from that. Also a research project. So to conclude, what are the take-home messages also for you AI people? Yeah, it's very important for agriculture to build robust and adaptive systems, because our plants grow year-round. We have seasonal changes, changing weather conditions, changes during the day, a lot of crop varieties, different crops, systems, constructions. Every farmer is doing it on its own way. So that makes it very difficult to make one software solution. And on the other hand, 50% solution is also a solution. That's something different than a human heart. If you grab something else, you might run into a problem. We don't have that problem that much in agriculture. You can make a small mistake, and if you harvest 50%, it's fine. Make systems brilliant, simple, but so think for the user would be very helpful. The farmer, because he has a lot of things to do. And if it does not work on paper or in simulation, it will not work. So we really need good simulation environments. Most of the technology is made available for us. Thank you for that, researchers. But I think it's really the design thinking to make a breakthrough. And it's not easy in agriculture. You really need to understand what is happening, how do the business cases look like, and what can we do. And I think AI is one of the key enablers. You can make technology as small as an end effector. And I think that's one of the major examples we now have. And that was not possible in the past. It's also important to work towards autonomous farms and make robust and hygienically designed robots as good as possible. This was my presentation. Thank you very much. Open for questions.
I'm alone, I'm a broken home. I gave you all the bricks that I own and know. I'm letting go, I'm breaking these walls down, breaking these walls down. If you want adventure, then fly to home. But if you wanna travel, then go alone. Yeah, what's the point in us if I never know? Yeah, if you're gonna leave, I'ma let you go. I'm tired of the pain. Go away. I'm tired of yesterday. Harder. I fell where my demons dwell. My own little nightmare, I call it hell. Oh well, it's time to get back up. Climbing and climbing, I'm done with this ride, is what I tell myself, so I could feel something else. Yeah, I guess I had my bad days, but it doesn't mean I lost my styling. Where were you when my heart was on the ground? I thought time would prove that you would stick around. I guess time stood still, a king without his crown. Now I'm breaking, you're faking, girl. I'm alone, I'm a broken home. I gave you all the bricks that I own.
All right, I think we're live. Hello, everyone. My name is Stijn, and I'm here on behalf of the Symposium Committee. We are the committee that normally organizes the yearly ACAIS, but obviously because of the circumstances, we had to reformat to an online panel. Now, the topic of this panel today will be about artificial intelligence and sustainability. It's no secret that environmental sustainability has been a hot topic in recent times. The changes in the world have impacted all of our lives already, and we as a committee and as AI students wanted to see what we can learn about working towards a sustainable future aided by AI. Now, we have invited 3 experts in their respective fields that have worked on or with AI technologies that are relevant to this topic. We'll have our moderator lead the panel, and to all the viewers, the questions to the panelists can be asked during the panel by either typing in the chat or writing us an email, and the email can be found in the description of the stream. However, keep in mind that there is a roughly 30 seconds delay in the stream, so it might take a bit for your question to show up. Additionally, we'll have a Menti link for interactive answering with the viewers. So go to the link in the description to be able to participate and or join using the QR code and our code that can be seen on screen from time to time. Now, on behalf of the committee, I'd like to thank all the viewers for being here and the panelists and moderator for participating in this reformatted symposium despite the current times. This being said, I'd like to hand the word to Wouter Bulten, our esteemed moderator.
Well, thank you for the introduction. I'm Wouter, so I'm a PhD candidate working at Radboud University Medical Center. And the committee asked me today to be the moderator of this discussion. We're going to talk about a wide range of topics. And it was already said, we're going to mix like questions that were prepared beforehand with questions that you can enter live, and also input from the Menti. So make sure to fill that in. I would like to start with a short introduction round by our 3 speakers. So maybe Kadian, you can start by quickly saying who you are and what your topic of research is.
Hi, I'm Kadian Davis, and I'm a postdoc researcher at the Delft University of Technology. I'm currently working with self-management systems on a project called Food Sampler at Delft University of Technology.
Thank you. Erik?
My name is Erik Pekkeriet. I'm the program manager of agri-food robotics at Wageningen University and Research, so responsible for the whole robotic portfolio.
Jorge?
Hi, this is Jorge. I'm the director of data science at Connectera, and my expertise is in AI. My background is in AI, and what we do has to do with dairy industry, and we apply AI to the dairy industry.
Thank you. So to start, I want to switch to Menti, to our first question. The first question was, so what is sustainable AI for you? We had some options. Well, if we look at the votes, I think most of them would say a system that combats global warming. I don't think we'll be talking about that specifically today. Would be nice. But we see a lot of overlap, I think, between the answers and what was discussed in the talks. Things like reducing manual labor, which is of course applicable to farming. Also coexistence with a human in the loop, which has been discussed. So now I would like to ask the same question to the panel. What is your view on like sustainable AI, maybe from your field of research? Who would like to start?
I can start. There's no one there is daring to contribute. Well, I even filled in the Mentimeter, so for me, yeah, I don't know if all the options were there, but at least I chose manual labor, low amounts of power, because that's an issue I see increasing when more data is used, and data center produce a lot of energy, so that's something to concern about. And of course, we would like to combat global warming. And I think AI can really make a big contribution to that. And I'm from food production. So still the farmer is in the loop, but therefore the farmer is also taking decisions. And I really am waiting for the autonomous farm when you can come to a continuous improvement and monitor everything. And the farmer cannot make his own decisions, and the consumer is making the decision. That would be ideal, I think.
So a sustainable farm would be a farm that can continue to exist without any human effort in that sense.
Well, at least when it comes to the decision, yeah, a human is one person, that he can also damage the whole nation. So that's perhaps not you should see it in a broader sense, but as let's call it society. So when a society wants to have a more sustainable product, there comes a cost to it and also a big effort. And I think with AI you can really control these kind of mechanisms in the future.
Jorge, would you agree with this point of view?
Yeah, I think I would tend to agree. And also, what I see from the answers here is that really, to me, these options are not necessarily mutually exclusive. And I think that's also part of why this problem is so complicated, right? I think if we look at, of course, global warming, that's something that we want to fight against. But at the same time, you look, for example, at the answer about using low amounts of power. I mean, if you have a system that uses a lot of power, that power has to come from somewhere, right? And more often than not, that will produce CO2. And even if it doesn't, even you have to consider something like battery, right? Even when you produce a battery, in that process, there will be some CO2 that gets emitted to the atmosphere. So nothing comes for free. And I think many of these topics are actually correlated with each other, actually.
Kadian, I think your topic is of course completely different from agriculture. What did you vote for?
Yeah, so I would definitely vote for a system that combats global warming. And second, I'd like to say a system that uses low amounts of power. And finally, a system that reduces manual labor. In terms of combating global warming, when you think about the smart home, we can design innovations that can combat global warming and also a low carbon economy, which we will talk about later in the talk. And in terms of reducing manual labor, when we think about health sustainability, we can design innovations that can reduce the burden of caregivers or hospital workers, doctors, nurses, etc., which we're also seeing in the current society.
Yes, I think all of you said like, okay, reducing manual labor. I mean, that's a nice way to transition to the first question that was asked by the committee. So what they told me is like, okay, in all the fields that you talk about, you're trying to account for like a growing consumer demand. So it could be we want to have more food production, or we have an aging population in the Netherlands, so we need somehow to compensate for that. But the question the committee had is, how do you think this would fare on a global perspective? So if we're replacing maybe simple manual labor, how would that work in different countries that are not as similar as the Netherlands? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, first I think I can mention that the consumer demands and it costs actually more labor at the moment, so that's not very sustainable. So the consumer wants, of course, more ecological produce, and I can understand that. So less pesticide, but yeah, so a lot more weeding, a lot more crop maintenance. We run now into intercropping, which means that we put different crops next to each other. We don't have the machines for it yet, so that's one part where we see an increase of labor. It's in horticulture and agriculture. Another thing that also increases labor is at the moment the personalized idea. So you see all change in between are a little bit squeezed. So the farmer get a lot more tasks in packaging, in making it more personalized to to the people. So a lot of packaging staff which were original in the value chain are now thrown back to the farmer. So perhaps it is even a saving of labor because it's not done into the value chain, but it's at the farmer's location. But at the farmer location, at least it's more labor at the moment. And with all the AI and smart farming, when a farmer still needs to make a lot of decisions and does not have the knowledge, it also costs much more labor. So AI is still not smart enough. At the moment, it costs more labor.
Okay, so well, somebody in the chat asked, so do you think we need less farms in the future because we have fully automated systems? So would your answer then be no?
No, I hope not. I think the largest world population, if I look to Asia and Africa, but even Europe, are quite running on small farms. So, and I don't think that a robot needs to be big. A robot will be something with a limited capacity. So, if, for example, if you take an average Dutch greenhouse, which is quite a big greenhouse, I understand, of 10 hectares, you already need 40 people at harvest. So in robot terms, these are also more or less 40 robots. But yeah, if you have a fully autonomous system, you can also buy one robot and let it run on a very small field. So I don't think you need big machines. I think with robots, you can even go into smaller machines and so also smaller farms and more local farming. I think local farming is also a very good way to be more sustainable because now we ship a lot of food on our roads. So more than 50% of all the transport is food related. So when we are able to produce it closer to the place where it should be consumed, we do a good job.
And you don't think that's maybe too expensive? I mean, the larger the farm, probably the cheaper it will be in terms of cost.
It depends on what you are targeting. If you target carbohydrates, so grains, rice, potatoes, then you need a lot of land, and that's what you always will see. Then you can do it everywhere in the world because it's also bulk produce. But when you also have time, so it's only one harvest a year, and then you can ship. You also have time. That's also very helpful. But if you want to consume fresh produce, lettuce, tomatoes, that's a continuous production, and also strawberries. And another thing is that carbohydrates you can produce everywhere, but the fresh produce are in most cases not produced everywhere. And these fresh produce will not cost a lot of space actually. We made an estimation. So what is a city of Beijing needed for space for producing their carbohydrates? For all the consumers, 30 million people, and if you build a box of 100 by 100 kilometers, you can. That's also where the people live, by the way. So you need another box of 100 by 100 kilometers, and then you can produce the carbohydrates for them. But if you come to fresh produce, lettuce, tomatoes, these kind of things, you only need 0.5% of that amount if you do to very high productive greenhouses, for example, because you have a year-round crop, a very short cycle, also a lot of water, I must admit. But for these crops, it's very important to be very close to the consumer. It does not cost a lot of space, but it's a lot of transport and also a lot of impact. So because you need to produce every day and deliver every day. So these kind of products is very important to be done close to rural cities.
Okay. I would like to ask the same kind of question to Kadian. So what do you think regarding the labor force that is needed? I mean, you're working, for example, on smart monitoring. You could also hire a lot of people to meet those people and see how they are doing.
Sorry, could you repeat your last statement?
So you could also hire a lot of people in a healthcare system to just go to the houses, talk to people, see how they're doing. Are these systems reducing labor in that sense?
Well, it depends on the society. So, for example, in the Netherlands, if we implement smart systems, then of course it will reduce labor. For example, the care specialists, those who take care of the elderly, example. If we can have invite older people to self-manage their chronic illnesses, then of course it would reduce the burden of the caregivers in having to travel, which is already having an implication on transportation and the self-burden of having to always caring for more than one person, etc. So yeah, it would reduce the burden on the labor market. But when you think about places like Africa or Asia, they don't necessarily have the resources to afford that. So it depends really on the location, the geographical location.
Okay. I think I'm going to make a nice transition to the next theme. The one thing that I saw in I think all of your presentations is that there's a lot of data collection, of course, for these systems. It could be whether a cow is eating or whether my grandmother is sitting, for example. So we asked the question on Menti. So a lot of data is collected. Who should have end control over the collected data? For example, is that the company that builds the system and tries to improve on the systems, or is it my grandmother because she's being tracked? Let's see what the results are. I think the majority votes for the entity that's being tracked. Well, maybe in case of a cow, that will be difficult, but it could be then maybe the farmer that should have ownership of the data. Jorge, you're working in a company, so I think you will deal with these kind of problems. What do you think about this topic?
Yeah, so I think it varies a lot per use case, actually. So, of course, in our case, because the entity is the cow, that's not the one that can have the control, obviously. So it should be the farmer in that case. And I think, again, it depends on the final objective. So for him, the final objective in giving us access to that data is so that he can be more productive in his work. Now, let's say any use of that goes from there, that's what we should try to avoid. And for example, in our case, the farmer always has to we always have to ask permission for the farmer if we want to share that kind of data with third parties. Not that we do, because the goal is still the same one. But in this case, I don't really see a lot of problems with that, because you can also, if you're not happy with the system, you can just withdraw your consent. So that's always fine.
But then would the data be anonymized, for example, or could you do you think that a user should be able to retract all the data from the system?
So I think in our case, actually quite easy to anonymize it, again, because it has to do with the cow. It doesn't necessarily have to do with a farmer, or I think it will be very, very hard to trace back, let's say, any cow-based information back to a particular farmer. With that being said, you can retract it to different levels, right? I think at that point, it doesn't necessarily have to be personal information anymore. But I would say, even if it was, there's always the tricky question of, okay, the models that I have already trained with that data, even if it was, let's say, personal information, does that count as personal information? And I think that's right now where the law is a little bit, is not clear on that, because I think it's a really new topic, and I don't think the personal information kind of laws that deal with that have updated to this kind of scenario.
Yeah, so are the weights of a neural network based on personal information also personal information?
Yeah.
Yes, that's a difficult topic, also in the medical domain where I'm working. So what is it derived data or is it new data? Kadian, I think you are working with maybe more privacy sensitive data.
Yeah.
Who should have end control over that data? Is it you?
Yeah, so I would argue for the entity that's being tracked. And in support of the legislation, the GDPR, it basically suggests that the user should have access first of all, they should know what information is being tracked. They should also know in terms of their personal information, be able to go and correct that data, delete that data. And in addition to that, they should always be able to turn on or turn off the device at any time, because at the end of the day, they should be in control of their information, their personal data.
And so let's say you are working with elderly, for example.
Yeah.
Would you also maybe argue that maybe the child who is trying to monitor his or her mother should be the person that the one to be in control?
No, no, because I worked firsthand with elderly people, and that was one of the first questions that we did in our user research. And they were always complaining that whenever, because our system was bidirectional, so the child was able to monitor the elderly, and the elderly was also able to monitor the child. And when you speak with the elderly, they always say, I don't like the idea that my child is able to see everything that I'm doing. It feels like Big Brother is watching me. So they, even if they're frail, they should be able to control that information. Yeah.
That makes sense. I think I would say the same. Yeah. So if we look at society now, we see that we're measuring a lot. So I made a statement on Menti on we have a fetish for metrics, like the number of views on this live stream, the number of time a cow walks by, number of times I go to the toilet in my smart home. So I asked this question to the audience. Where it is. Did we remove it from the stream? Well, let me first just ask it to you. Are we measuring too much? Maybe Kadian, maybe you can start with this.
Well, I wouldn't say we're measuring too much, right? Because all our devices are connected, our watches, our TVs, etc. But what happens is, how are we dealing with the information that we're measuring? Are we able to give insights to the data? How can we give back to the people that we're collecting data for? For example, in my project, we are measuring how people eat, right? The type of food that they eat, and then we're trying to encourage them to self-report. But if we're collecting information about them, what are we giving them back, right? So we need to provide users with more insights. How are we portraying the information that we are measuring? Are we just showing them graphs? The average user sometimes doesn't know how to interpret a graph. So how is it that we're visualizing this information so that people can move from a state of mindlessness to mindfulness? And that's very relevant in sustainability. For example, with energy consumption, if I start knowing, if I'm measuring my energy consumption, and then I get that awareness, am I going to change my behavior? So that's very relevant.
Yeah, so you would say if there's a utility in measuring the data, it's okay.
Yeah. There has to be an end goal. That's what I'm saying. You have to help people to transition, as I mentioned before, from that mindlessness, not knowing about what the data means. You give them a meaning for their data, and then you can help change their behavior.
So you're not afraid that we're maybe putting the data in control? Or do you think that's a good thing? That could also be
I think there needs to be a balance. That's my position. So people, so you're measuring, but then people can control what you're measuring. So if they don't want to be measured, then they simply turn off the device. Right?
And that's fine. I don't think that maybe the cow can disable it, but they will probably not reject it. Then I think we had the question in the Menti, but we just yes, was this one. So we should limit AI systems that use and learn from this activity data. I think most of the people indeed said disagree, so they're agreeing with you. some people agreed. So if you have any, to the audience, if you want to give your opinion on this, please leave it in the chat. I think it's a good point to maybe go into some questions specific to the speakers, because we received quite a few in the chat so far. So I think it would be nice to have a few questions directly to you, and then afterwards we can have some more discussion. I'm going to check on the list. So the first one is from for Jorge from Connectera. Why did you choose to focus on dairy products and not, for example, on crops? And are you also considering using your system for crop production?
Yeah, so it's a good question. The reason why we started with cows, I think first of all, the market is very big. There's a lot of cows in the Netherlands, so it was kind of the obvious choice as well. Could it be used for animals? I think so. I think the technology is there, and I mean in the end the way you would do it would be the same, right? I think it would be a different use case. The reason why we don't do it is because we found out while on this journey that actually the dairy industry is huge, and really the different problems that you have in different parts of the world in running your operation are just so varied and so vast that really that's more than enough work for us to do. But yeah, again, the same technology could be used also for crops as well, definitely.
Okay, and maybe to stay with you, because there was already like a follow-up question. Do you think that you can use the same models that you trained on the farms you are deploying a system now to, for example, farmers in underdeveloped countries?
I think we can actually, and as a matter of fact, we've done this already. So I think also, like, as you do this, then you kind of uncover what the most important factors of variation are. I think that also depends on the kind of problem that you're going to solve. So I think for health, for instance, again, depending on what you are, it is possible that some disease happens more often than another, right? So I kind of bias a little bit you can bias the model when you go to a farm that's new. But I think some things mostly have to do more with actually how the farmer works, and let's say, for example, with how consistent he is with the stuff that he has to do on the farm. So what we see is that a farmer that's very consistent throughout the day, that all models work better in those farms, and that's simply because then kind of the behavior of the cows are more predictable. So in that sense, it does work. But of course, that's something that we just improve as we go, right? So whenever you get a new farm and some time passes, and then you get also examples for that farm, that's also something that you can incorporate back into your model. So eventually, it stops being a problem once you have enough examples of these.
And well, there's a beautiful follow-up question. So somebody asked, that does also work for like cows indoors versus cows that are outdoors? So like, are those things, do you need to account for that in your model, or?
So it works for both, basically, because the behaviors of the cows, they are very similar both indoors and outdoors. I would say the main difference is maybe when they eat, and simply because when they eat indoors, they have like this dry matter, right, that is kind of already separated from the ground. So the movement that you have to do when you pick it up is let's say less strong than what you would do to pluck out the grass, for instance. So in that sense, it is a little bit different. But any other than that, the behaviors are the same. What does change is how on what parts of the day the cow does what behavior. So this is different. But the behaviors themselves are very similar, and in practice, we don't really see much of a problem there actually.
Somebody, I'll just ask the last question to you. Somebody asked a nice question. If you look at like maybe not specifically to one cow, but maybe like the whole farm, can you, for example, with your models show that like a farm where cows are more often outside have less disease, or things like these patterns that are not really on a cow level, but could be like something the farmer does, and you can measure that it really benefits?
Yeah, so there's also quite a bit of research on this actually, and then there's a few variables that affect this, but mostly it has to do indeed with the environment. I don't think necessarily that the fact that they are outside really makes a big difference, but what could make a difference, for instance, is let's say how much space do they have when they are indoors, or what kind of floor do they have, because there's a difference between floors that are very hard, floors that are very soft, and you do see a difference in comfort, for instance, because when they have this thing called the bedding, right? So they put a lot of hay into the place where the cows lay down, and that's the moment when they are most comfortable. But then at some point, this hay starts to get really compacted, and at some point it becomes uncomfortable, and that's the point where you can maybe start to develop something. So you can see these things, but again, it does require like really big analysis to actually take all of the different farms that have all of these different factors of variation to really come up with a good answer for this.
Yeah, I can imagine that you need quite a lot of data for that.
No.
Well, I think you nicely answered the questions the audience had for you. So if there are any questions from the audience, please add them to the chat, and then we'll come back to them later. There were also a few questions for Kadian regarding your talk. The first one, I was also interested in this after seeing your talk. So you on the slide of the social U, you had like examples of the U lights and the LED lights. And one of the viewers asked, was there any meaning in the colors that the lights show?
Yes. So we had 3 colors. Well, initially we had 2 colors, right? After detecting the activities, we had our activity recognition classifier, and we detected whether the person was very active or just inactive at all. So that's the red for the curve stitching patterns on the slides. The red was for high activity, and the blue was for low activity. Later, when we spoke with our users, and again, that's the importance of co-designing and co-creation that I spoke to you about in the lecture. When we spoke with them, they said, hey, we need an intermediate activity. So the passive, meaning that, for example, if the person is very active, it's red. If they're sleeping, it's blue. But what happens when they're just sitting and watching TV? So the green is for passive activity.
And is this somewhere implemented right now? So are people using it, or is this more in a research setting?
No, it was more for the research setting, but it has promise for being developed into a product.
Yeah, I can imagine. You talked about co-creation, and one of the viewers also asked, so does it also work for maybe patients or clients which have some kind of disability, or maybe like dementia, or are there challenges there, or how would you see implementing a system like yours there?
Well, in terms of co-creation, there definitely will be challenges for having to get the requirements with people who are currently experiencing a cognitive decline. But there are still creative methods that you can use to help them to try and recall past events. So, for example, the co-constructive stories, other engagement strategies, probably gamification that can help to trigger them to remember something from their past. So you just have to work along with the different theories and models to try and trigger them to get information from them in that regard.
Yeah, okay. Let me look at the list of questions. There was also a question for you, Erik, on preventing loss of jobs. I think we already discussed that at the start. You made we had a nice discussion on that. So if the person that asked this question still wants to know more, then feel free to ask it in the chat.
Yeah, well, I can elaborate a little bit more on that, I think. I also saw the question, so I was already preparing. And I think there are 2 ways on it, and I already explained it. So you have the primary process and the secondary process. And the primary process, that's bad job, and secondary process is wonderful job. Because in the primary process, I mean that you have to touch, to harvest, to weed every product or read. So that is monotonous and repetitive work. all day long on the severe conditions. When you're outside, it's a lot of sunshine. When you are weeding, it's always hot. You are not weeding when it's raining. So when it's cloudy, you are always weeding when the sun is very high and hot. And in the greenhouse, it's also getting yeah, more and more difficult. And you already see that the people who are doing this kind of work are migrant workers. They are not from the Netherlands. And that's something you see all over the world. In Poland, so we have some Polish people, we pay them very well, much more than the minimum wages. But still, Dutch people do not come. And we also do not have year-round product. And if you come, you have to really be high productive because we have AI, we can measure everything. So we measure that you are harvesting at a rate of 0.7 seconds per tomato. And if you do not harvest in that speed, you will be replaced. Perhaps not today, not tomorrow, but within a week, you will be replaced. That's how it works at the moment in the Netherlands. That's also what data is doing. So giving a better meaning to data than only quantitative data would be very helpful, and also more, to give more value to the worker. So it's almost, but it's not only a Dutch problem. It's in Poland they have Ukrainians, but even in China they cannot find the workers anymore. They also see that they don't have a back country where they can find other people. They are people from other rural areas actually. So yeah, so it's very difficult, and I'm completely cured about saving jobs in the primary sector because no one wants to do it, and it's very seasonal. And I would like to give one example. I live in Amerongen, a place called near Utrecht. You have a wonderful castle, and they started ecological produce. So they have a very beautiful garden and a lot of volunteers. They also are depending on volunteers and a lot of subsidies to get this garden running. And they were it's a beautiful place. It's in the middle of a castle, very nice. And they all started very happily in April and in May. But then summer holiday came. But plants are growing continuously and volunteers were gone. But it became even worse when harvest time. So that's after the summer holidays, everything needs to be harvested. And yeah, it was very difficult to find the labor, and they could not harvest everything. And it's quite typically also apples last autumn were not harvested in the Netherlands because we could not find all the labor which we would need to have. So it's a worldwide problem. People are aging. Also, the Polish people that are coming to the Netherlands are aging. And last things I would like to say, if we go to robotics, in most cases that we cannot apply robotics because we cannot beat the business case. And the business case is not because the technology is that expensive and the robot is that expensive. No, it's actually not because there's not much materials on it. So it's the AI, but it's made by people. So all the costs that are involved with robots is not related to materials, it's related to people work. And I know it's high educated people. And what are we going to do with the low educated people? I think there are jobs enough in logistics, in cleaning that also can help to have a better performance of robots. It will be a shift to more higher educated work and more work in the secondary process, cleaning, logistics, these kind of efforts. It will be different, but the way we produce now, I call it slavery almost. That's not that's we are good at it in the Netherlands, but it's not the way not the way to go.
You asked also this question, I think, to the audience, to Menti, so maybe we can switch to that and see what the audience said. Wow.
It's a good idea.
89% agrees with you that we should add robots there. I'm not sure if any of these people who voted actually work in agriculture. So
Oh, but it's already good. If this is a representative of the consumer, I would be happy. And it's actually the consumer demands who makes it very hard and difficult for the worker. They don't are aware of that, but if I see the pressure which comes from the market towards the farm, also to make it ecological, these people are in most cases not harvesting their own food because it's very time consuming.
So you mean high demands
They have probably their own garden and it works, but yeah, in food production we have to fill the full food range year round. So a lot of food needs to be produced, and in the Netherlands we have almost 4% people working in agriculture producing food for the rest. Yeah, I don't see that grow to 50%.
No, me neither. And only 2 people said we should have our own food in our own garden, probably.
Yeah, do that because it brings you closer to nature. That's very good. And perhaps AI can help us also with that, because that's also a factor I think we lost. And people keep demanding and don't see what it will bring for the farm worker. And I fully agree, we must go to a much more sustainable way of production, but then we also pay the right amount of money for our food. That would be better. Then we can build robots.
Okay. Let me see. I think these were all the questions we had so far from the audience. So maybe let's go to a new Menti slide. This one we already had. Yes, maybe this is an interesting thing. So what at least I observe in society, or maybe in the Netherlands, is that we're slowly transitioning to like a service society. So you don't buy your clothing anymore, but you now can rent them. And you don't buy software anymore, but you get a license for a year. So the question to the audience was like, okay, this is a good thing from a sustainability aspect because, well, for example, with hardware, the company is forced to make something that's sustainable because otherwise they need to replace it. Well, if we look at the votes, most of the people would agree. What do you think? Should we use the same system for AI? So should we have it as a service? We have a subscription of, like a farmer takes a subscription on a software, or maybe an elderly home takes a subscription to monitor their residents. What do you think?
This question was also asked to me last week by a venture capitalist, because they are also working on robots, and they would like to rent these machines out and take over the full responsibility and also the service. But I think they forget one important issue, and that is that the farmer or the worker is also responsible for the performance. And if you take the farmer out of the loop, so AI will be built on software with algorithms, but you also have the data set and the feedback to train your system. And if you take the feedback mechanism out of your system, so that the farmer is not aware that he should have a very clean location facility, and he is always blaming the robot, then something goes wrong. Because it's a joint effort between the farmer. If he cleans his greenhouse or farm as good as possible with straight lines and very tidy, then the robot will perform better. So somewhere it's very important in these cases that you have a joint effort. And if that is not be discussed and there's no business model to it that it will have a mutual interest, then it will not work probably. But it can work if. So in some cases, I'm not sure. So I'm quite neutral. I would point out red.
I mean, I can also imagine there's also quite a risk, of course. Like if you're a farmer and invest in this, what if the prices go up? Like what you see now with, for example, food delivery, maybe increasing their food delivery platforms, increasing the pricing. What if your automated AI picker system for peppers also increases the cost per? I mean, that could be a risk there.
It's also a risk, but if it's even a risk to do services, because when the prices are low, he cannot rent his machine. How does it work with farmers? They have good years and they have bad years. When they have good years, they buy equipment. If they have bad years, they don't buy equipment. That's how it works. So they don't calculate their business case over multiple years, because harvests are changing. There are very big differences between one and another year. It's very difficult to invest in advance. I know these should be the rules and that's how it should work, but nature is different in this case. Not always easy.
Jorge, I'm not sure if you want to talk about this because it's more like the business side, but do you think that like AI as a software as a service is the way to go?
So I think, actually, again, I think it depends on the case. And the reason is that, for example, if that AI given as a software is something that makes sense, let's say, throughout a longer time period, and it's also a piece of software that's evolving, and it's something that, and let's say that part of the complexity is hidden for the person who is purchasing the product, then I think it makes sense that it is a service. I would argue that in other cases where that's not the case, then maybe less. So, for example, if I think of maybe it's not necessarily AI, but something like Spotify, and maybe I'm a bit old-fashioned, but I'm one of these people that like to have their music either in some physical format or as files. So for me, this is more like a one-time service, right? Either I get access to their music or I don't, and I don't necessarily use the extra features that the platform offers me. So if that is the case, then I don't necessarily see a lot of added value in having this as a service. However, if this is something that is continuously evolving and is, in the case, it has to do something with tracking animals and it has a demonstrated improvement over what I could do myself, then I do think it makes sense.
Kadian, you worked a lot on like the design of smart home systems. Did this question ever came up during?
No, but when I think about it, I'm a bit neutral in terms of my position, because really, who is going to be accountable when you offer this? For example, you offer a robot that's going to be doing activity monitoring or helping the elderly at home. Who is accountable if something goes wrong, if there's a false positive, etc.? So the question of accountability comes up when you decide to offer software as a service in smart homes.
But maybe the same thing would apply if you buy it, right? Because you buy software and you think it should work. I mean, if I buy a fridge and it explodes, then there's still accountability.
That's why I'm neutral, because with the software as a service, for example, if something goes wrong, can I just call in terms of the principles? What's available? If something goes wrong, can I call the person that I buy it from, the company, for them to come and repair it and address it? Who fixes what? So that's the question here.
Somebody added a comment in the chat. So this, in case of robots, I think it's a good idea to have them as a service. And then the connection to farming, like currently farmers also hire their specialist tools or machinery. I'm not sure if that's the case always. Maybe they also buy their equipment.
Yes, they also have a contractor. I'm a son of a contractor, so I know what he means. But I think farmers also getting bigger, and they have their own machinery also, and more and more actually.
I think in the US there's a discussion of the right to repair. That's also ties into this. So let's say you buy a smart monitoring system. Should the company provide support that you can fix it yourself, or should you always just tear the sensors of the wall and send them back to them?
Yeah, that's something. And then when you buy a system, you really own it, right? When you're always, for example, if you're gonna rent it from different software companies, then other people are gonna have access to your data. You're more at risk, etc. So I'm a bit neutral here.
Yeah, well, if you buy something and the company that makes is the only one who can supply you with spare parts, then you're still locked in, of course.
Yeah.
So we're approaching the end of our time slot. We still have 10 minutes to go. There was one question from the committee. I think we ask that every year to the speakers. So I think it's nice to have some time for that now. So there are AI students now listening in on this stream, and let's say they are interested in maybe a career in deep learning for farming, or smart monitoring is also a hot topic. So if they are, could you give them like maybe an advice, or what do you think they do, or could they maybe have sort of internships or things that they can do? What would you give them as advice if they would like to continue in your field? Maybe Kadian, you want to start?
Okay, so if you want to do smart monitoring, then you can, but you can also do an internship. I think companies like Philips, and there are lots of different companies that are into smart homes and smart monitoring. So you can take the industry perspective. Then you can also apply to do a master's. I think even we worked with someone from Radboud University. He developed the Digest-In app. Maybe you're aware of it. It's a self-monitoring tool. So you can try to do a master's that's geared towards self-management or smart home monitoring, activity recognition, etc. There are several options for that. And again, you can steer your research direction towards doing a PhD, etc. But first, I would advise you to start doing your own research and try to dive into a focus on what exactly you want to do, because it's a very broad scope that you can take. So I would first narrow the scope as to what you want to achieve and work with when it comes to smart homes.
Are there any maybe like skills you think are really important, or maybe topics which you say like you need to have a machine learning experience, or maybe more behavioral science things?
So I will take the multidisciplinary perspective, because I'm coming from the design school. So first of all, many people are designing products that are not usable, right? And if you're I would advise you, when you're working on designing products, to always have the feedback from the experts, get to know your users, observe them, etc. That they want. So that's something that you need to do. And then I would advise you that, for example, I came from Jamaica, and I had no electrical engineering experience, but then my PhD allowed me to go to Italy, where I had to learn how to do signal processing, machine learning, etc. So that's definitely important before in order to design smart home products.
Okay, sounds good advice. Yeah. It's nice that it's such a interdisciplinary field. When I read like the chapters of your PhD, like, okay, like very different things are coming together.
Yeah, because you have to look at the social aspects and help the physical aspects. If I can promote people to become physically active, if I can ensure their psychological well-being, etc., then I can design products to help them to improve their quality of life.
Okay. Jorge, I think you're no, you're a company. A lot of students want to go to industry after their masters or maybe even their bachelors. You're probably maybe also always looking for talent. What are you looking for? What do you think? What would you give advice for people that want to start in your field or do the things you are working on?
So I guess maybe one advice that I like, that I also used to do myself, is to actually go to these meetup events that get organized from time to time. Because in these events, actually, there's always like 2 or 3 people that talk about what is it that they do in their businesses, and you get to talk also with the people that are there to listen to what the people have to say. And I think that if for nothing else, at least it gives you a sense of the kind of stuff that you would like to work on and of the kind of stuff that you would not like to work on, which I also think is very important to be clear on that. So I think that would be one thing. I think the other thing, which is something that, for example, I have struggled with in the past, is that there's always a lot of stuff going on in terms of machine learning research and new techniques, new tools. Like every single day, there's literally tens of papers that you could be reading on new techniques. And I think it's important to stay kind of, even if you don't understand everything, but at least to have an idea or where things are going and what kind of the hot topics are at every moment. So maybe going to a conference or again looking for papers, or if you have a particular set of people that you like following in what the work that they do, because it's actually, once you go to the stage where you have to apply for a job or for an internship or something like this, at least personally, I do see a big difference between candidates and the kind of skills that they have. So that is also something that we value.
And would you recommend a specific meetup, for example? Maybe they're not hosted now, but is there one that you go to often, or?
There's a bunch of them. I think there's like, I'm in Amsterdam right now, so in Amsterdam we have a bunch of them. But I also know there's one in Utrecht, and I'm sure there's in almost every big city there's going to be a bunch of them. So I think if you go to the page, you would probably find more than enough, more than you can possibly ever attend.
Well, good advice. That's nice. We had a few meetups on deep learning in Nijmegen before. Maybe there will be a few in the future. Erik, you are working in university in Wageningen.
Yes.
What would your advice be if students would like to maybe do a PhD in your field of work? Or?
Yes, we already have some startup with also students in Nijmegen at Wageningen working on agriculture and food. I think that would, so we have good facilities for startups, but also, we are a group of 40 researchers on robotics at Wageningen University and Research. I'm more from research, so we do applied research for companies. So what we make should also be applied by a company. So sorting machines, these kind of things. And I think agriculture and food is very nice sector, especially when you look into the future. So you know that in the Netherlands we have 2 to 4% people working in agriculture, but if you look to the rest of the world, it's a lot more. It's still above 20%, but even China thinks that they will decline from 25 to 5% within 20 years. So, and I think AI is the biggest driver to do that. And I think if you really would go to sustainable food production of or even nature preserve, then it's very important to have the human out of the loop and let data tell how sustainable you are. And from that perspective, AI is, I think, the key enabler of food production and also in robotics. In my presentation, I gave the example of only an anti-factor and the rest is AI. And but it needs to be fast, it needs to be good, reliable. But yeah, we have in the whole industry, there are 200 million workers in production. In agriculture is 2 billion. So it's 10 times more people who are doing short cycle repetitive work. So if we would like to make it more sustainable, because I think AI can really make it more sustainable, then we need a lot of AI people, and it's difficult. So you have to align with the farmer very well, because you think that you have an idea for a one-time occasion, but a crop is changing, through the year, from year to year. So it's not homogeneous as you would like to have it, but it's a very interesting area, and still quite new. In the Netherlands, we are very good at it, also in the machinery as in growing plants. So you are very much suited to open up the rest of the world, I think, and the whole world is also looking to Wageningen and the Netherlands, how we are producing food. We are the second exporter in the world still. So in this small country of agri-food products, perhaps a little bit too much, I agree, but at least all the knowledge is here, and you are at the best spot to accelerate.
I think it's a very nice message that we need more AI people. I think that's good to hear.
Yeah, definitely.
So we have approached the end of this panel discussion. Before we end, maybe I want to give the opportunity to one of the speakers. Is there still something you would like to add? You can speak up now. Anything?
Yeah, you're welcome to pursue a master's in research or a PhD at TU Delft. We have several initiatives towards smart homes, so consider it.
Nice. Okay, well, I think we're at the end of this live stream. So first, thank you for the panel to be present now, and all your effort on recording your presentations beforehand. It's a strange time, and I think it's very nice that we could do this digitally. So thank you very much. I would also like to thank the committee for organizing the symposium this year. It was probably quite a struggle for them to transition from a full live event to this digital event, but I think it was very nice. And of course, finally, thank you to the audience for tuning in this afternoon. I hope you liked it. I hope you liked the discussion. And I hope to see you, of course, next year. Thank you.
Okay.
I'm alone, I'm a broken home. I gave you all the bricks that I own and know. I'm letting go, I'm breaking these walls down, breaking these walls down. If you want adventure, then fly to home. But if you wanna travel, then go alone. Yeah, what's the point in us if I never know? Yeah, if you're gonna leave, I'ma let you go. I'm tired of the pain. Go away. I'm tired of yesterday. I fell where my demons dwell, my own